Ladies and gentlemen, let's Red Gamer Telecom video. Ubisoft are at it again. This time people are pretty damn angry considering the minimum PC specifications of Assassin's Creed Unity. Oh dear. Now, when the specs first came to light, which were actually earlier on today, I have to admit that I believed it initially that the specs were, well, wrong. But since then, Ubisoft have officially confirmed the specifications, and to say that they're baffling is an understatement. I'll quickly go through them. First of all, not unsurprising, it's a 64-bit OS only. Fine, 64-bit Windows, so Windows 7 or above. So 7, 8 or 8.1, 64-bit, fine. However, here's where it gets really baffling. The processor specification is an i5 2500K. This is minimum, by the way, running at 3.3 GHz, or, and this is where it gets really odd, an AMD FX-8350 at 4 GHz, or, this is the odd one, an AMD Phenom 2 X4 940 at 3 GHz. I'll go into why it's really odd in just a second. The recommended, however, is an i7 3770 at 3.4 or an FX-8350, which, by the way, is the same one as minimum, which is a bit curious, but once again at 4 GHz. Now, minimum RAM, 6 gigs. Okay, I can definitely get behind that. Recommended is 8. Definitely get behind that. It makes perfect sense, to be honest. I think most gamers now are going to be rocking at least 8 gigs of RAM. And 6 gigs, you know, if you've got an older processor, like the old i7s maybe, you have that. But let's just say 8 gigs. 6 to 8 gigs is, you know, normal. But this one is caused quite a stir. The minimum GPU is an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 680. Or an AMD Radeon 7970. The minimum amount of VRAM is 2 gigs. Perfectly okay. I can get behind that. But the recommended GPU is a GTX 780 or an AMD R9 290X. Now, it has to be said, I'm really curious about that because the R9 290X is actually faster than 780. It's closer, I'd say, to the 780 Ti. So that's really curious. I don't quite know what's going on there. So there are so many different issues I've got with these specs. First of all, what the hell are they doing with the CPU? I can understand to a degree because of the multi-thread performance of the consoles, right? But the fact of the matter is, and I've shown various benchmarks of this before, and they're freely available just about everywhere. We all know that the x86 processor inside the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, let's take the PS4s because it's the slowest, it's running at 1.6, confirmed by Sony, compared to the Xbox One's 1.75. So let's go with the PlayStation 4 because it's the lower of the two. 1.6 GHz. It's nowhere near as fast as either core for core or just as a whole processor to the i5. So even though there's 6 processors available, 6 cores, shall I say, available for games, so there's no way that an i5 is even slightly comparable to a AMD Jaguar. At best, I mean, it's not even in the same ballpark, so I don't really get that one. And when, however, they refer to the AMD Phenom, really? Really? I'm going to quote a benchmark from Anantech, which was posted, when was it posted? Basically, January of 2009. Now, this specification, this processor review was of a couple of different ones, Cinebench being one of them. And to give you an idea, it has the X4 940 running at 3451 for the Cinebench, and then it has, it's basically putting out the i7 920 at 3846. In other words, it's slower, and this is in a single thread, by the way, so not multi-thread, so the i7's got the advantage of hyper-threading. And by the way, the i7 is of course the previous generation to the Sandy Bridge base 2500, and on top of that it's running at a slower clock speed, but even so, the i7 is still beating it by 3,846. So in other words, it's got roughly 400 points. So I'm a bit curious on that. I have to say, I don't really get or understand why the Phenom 2 is listed under minimum specifications when it's considerably slower than both the FX-8350, considering the 8350 is also listed under recommended, which is a bit weird, but aside the point. And then you've got the i5 2500K. Now, when I first saw these specifications for the GTX 680, I must confess there was a part of me that did assume that these were wrong. I just genuinely do not see how the hell a GTX 680 is the minimum. Now, what I do wish is Ubisoft elaborated. Is this the minimum for, let's say, 1440p, 1080p? What? And also, what are the specs? Now, some people are immediately going to point out that this is the next generation Assassin's Creed Unity. However, after the issues, I mean, the only thing I can think of is this is the minimum to get the game running at 60 frames a second plus, with a decent level of anti-aliasing, and all of this PC-specific special effects. We know that they're there. So in other words, theoretically, this is the minimum to get the game looking the best possible. But that still seems pretty suspicious to me. And I've been reading over, of course, the normal sources like NeoGAF and so on and so on. And you can imagine how nuts people are going on those forums, because it's like people are immediately screaming at optimization, and the problem is, well, it's hard to disagree. But before anyone panics, there are a few things we need to remember. Remember the whole 6 gigabytes from a certain game which is not based on Lord of the Rings, honest, wink, wink, wink. Well, as we all know, that did run on cards which were like 2 or 4 gigs, and it ran fine. For the most part, if you did have like the highest quality textures, you did get some texture issues, texture swapping issues, but generally it was fine. And even the Evil Within, like, okay, to run the Evil Within is a really weird game, but Bethesda recommend that you should have 4 gigs of VRAM, blah blah blah. In reality, you can run it fine at 2 gigs. Now, admittedly, you're only going to be getting 30-ish frames a second on the cards that they don't feel is going to meet the recommended specs, but it still runs better than consoles. So while people are kind of raging of this, I would say the best option for this one is just to wait and see, because Ubisoft are getting a lot of flack with this, not just from the PC side of things, but also the consoles, because we all know that Microsoft and Ubisoft have kind of a deal at the moment, and many are already alluding to the fact that, well, basically PlayStation 4 owners are getting a nerfed version on behalf of, well, so basically the Xbox One owners are getting a version that's inferior, and yet they have a deal with Microsoft. Obviously, that's just not good for business from Ubisoft's point of view. Now, as you would expect, this does require a DX version of at least 11, which isn't surprising given the graphics card. I have to say that, and I actually had this conversation with a couple of even viewers on RGT just a while back, and I think for the most part there's a consensus with many people in the industry that Assassin's Creed Unity doesn't look that amazing. I mean, it looks good. It definitely looks better than the previous generation Assassin's Creeds, and it does look better than, say, Assassin's Creed Black Flag, but I wouldn't go as far as to say it looks truly next generation. Like, Just to give you an idea of what I mean by this, the last time when we saw games that were incredibly PC or graphics intensive, like the original Crysis, and that game made everyone's PC its bitch. It really did. It was just ridiculous. But you know what? When you saw that bloody game running, you didn't care. You were like, okay, well, I'm going to be selling my kidney now to run this because it looks astounding. And I would actually arguably say, I mean, I've got a couple of videos of Crysis, the original Crysis on the channel, and running that thing at max now, I would arguably say, yes, some of the lighting doesn't look as good, and there are some texture issues, blah, 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 but overall, the game still looks stunning, considering that that game was released, what, like 2000, I think it was 2007, but come on now, it's a 7-year-old-ish game, and the game still looks like it's holding up. And that game at the launch, Crysis just looks incredible. And I don't get that feeling with AC Unity. Sure, it has a lot of people in the crowd and so on, but I don't want to say Ubisoft are screwing up, because at the end of the day, I don't know at the moment. I'll wait until they explain themselves for these PC specifications, but I have to say, my gut feeling, initial knee-jerk reaction, is they're bloody high considering the title. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.